Good morning. Ooh, good volume here. Thank you. Okay, good morning all. The 940 5G to XG Accelerating Decision-Making panel. We're going to look to kick that off. My name is Captain Brett O'Donovan, call sign T-Rex. I'm in the Indo-PACOM J6 right now. Also on the panel, we have Dr. Tarun Soni, Colonel Retired Mike Boutte, Mr. Dave McDonald, and Ken Davis. As we go along, they'll each have an intro and an introduction to look at their perspective on where we're going in this world. I'm going to kick us off with a little bit of where I come from. And to begin with, I told my wife I was going to be on a panel for 5G, and she said, "You can't even make the computers in your spaces work. How are you now on a panel where you're going to look at 5G?" So I'm going to do the best I can, and luckily we got some smart people from industry to help bail us out. Sitting here in San Diego, I've done half my career in San Diego. So when I think about what West is and what this area is for our Navy and our nation, I see different perspectives. So many may see I've got pilot wings as well as an information warfare pin. So when I started looking at San Diego is a fleet concentration area. You have 32nd Street, you have the ships, you have a phenomenal shipyard, you have North Island over there with our helicopters. Previously had a significant presence for S3s and aviation, as well as the head of naval aviation right across the bay there. Similarly, depending on your perspective, we have the NAVWAR SysCom. So our Systems Command for Information Technology is right up the road as well. So depending on where you sit and where you come from, you may be looking more from an operational perspective or more from a science technology perspective. I'm hoping that today we'll be able to bridge the gap of both. When I think of 5G and I think about it from an operator perspective, I think of get me the bandwidth as much as possible, push as many ones and zeros with the lowest latency. From across the bay and down at 32nd Street, they don't necessarily care very much how or when, as long as you can do it effectively and make sure you get the mission complete. When you go a little further north to Old Town and look at some of our industry partners trying to push this, that perspective is a little different. The how you get those ones and zeros to where they need to go, the way you process that data, and the way you actually get there efficiently is critically important. So I love the fact that this conference is here and you have that awesome balance from the Systems Command, industry, as well as the fleet all in one place. So the first time I heard about 5G was in the 2015-2016 timeframe. I was a requirements officer for a satellite program that was dealing with 3G. And somebody asked me the question, why are we doing 3G, not 5G? And I said to myself, I wonder what 5G is. So I opened up the Google machine on the computer, put into a search, or another search engine, so a vendor agnostic search engine, and put in the search bar, what is 5G? And I realized that it said it's high bandwidth, low latency, using a higher frequency band. I said, why is somebody asking me why we would use this instead of 3G for a geosynchronous satellite? It makes no sense. 3G was very good at canopy penetration in an urban environment. When you're looking at some of the higher end pieces of 5G, that is no longer applicable. But that does not mean it is not where we should continue to go. So as I've read more about 5G and looked more into it over the last couple of years, the processing is also a balance from some of the historic technology from 3G and 4G, some of the lower latency, lower bandwidth, higher latency, lower bandwidth pieces, but the back-end integration of leveraging the best path to get the signal to where it needs to go. So being able to leverage PLEO or terrestrial transport and be able to leverage those other capabilities and see what the best path is to be able to get the information where it goes. Beyond that, technically I'm out, which is why I made sure that we brought some other smart folks in the panel. And with that as a beginning intro, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Soni for his opening remarks.
This works, right? Yeah, press it. I got to do something to make it work, so it failed right there. Thank you, T-Rex. So we have been building comm systems networks for the warfighter for a while now. You might know that. Most of those are built with a specific intent in mind. But if you back away from the details, the intent has always been right information, right time, right user. Can't argue with that, right? That part's easy as a vision and an intent. Once you start stepping below that, you start building these networks. Well, as you go forward, you're going to have to build, let's call them bigger networks, digital battle networks, not just individual networks for individual missions. That's kind of how the internet works. It's not a network for a mission. It just happens to be a network that lots of missions ride on. So when you start going down that path, that's when you start stepping into things like 5G, which is what can I use to build that digital network while maintaining my existing exquisite solutions, which have been built for a reason. Adversary, range, stealth, whatever the reason happens to be. We have exquisite sub-networks, let's call them that. Putting them together is a big deal for 5G. So that's the end goal, if you will, JADC2, if you want the current phrase. The earlier hanging fruit almost is, can I use 5G for efficiency? So if you think about all the things that are going on in commercial world as well as our world, which is smart warehouses, smart factories, et cetera, there is, can I use 5G to get there, right? The additional trick to that is, in addition to integrating with our workflows, which are different from commercial workflows, is being able to put the security in place. So that's sort of our view is twofold. One is, can I use 5G for digital transformation, efficiency, those sorts of things? And can I use 5G as my organizing principle for putting together all the various sub-networks, if you will, and provide data at, I'll go back to the right person, right time, right place. Okay, enough said. Mike?
And thank you, Tarun. Next will be Michael Boutte. It's on already.
All right. Hey guys, Mike Boutte here. Thanks very much for the introduction. I'm really pleased to be part of this discussion. The symposia like these are very important in our private public relationships. And a lot of what we talk about here are, it's going to form legs, and from those discussions, it'll form trust, and out of the trust, eventually partnerships, and those partnerships bring capability. A little bit about myself. So I've been with AT&T for about 3 years. I live in Hawaii with my colleague here, Dave. And prior to that, I was, a retired colonel, obviously, as you can see on my nameplate. But I had a lot of exposure to the wicked problem sets in the Pacific AOR, working with PACAF, Pacific Air Forces. I was exposed to war games, ACE. Back then, there was no EABO on the Marine side, the Expeditionary Advanced Basing Operations, but they're very similar. Big data, I was a CDO, Chief Data Officer, CTO, and an interim CIO for PACAF. And in those positions, I was able to see what those problems were. So when I joined AT&T, I was very excited to actually put solutions in some of the collaborations that we have, specifically with Northrop here, Dr. Soni. How can we put those needs and those capabilities to use? So we've been going after those. A little bit about AT&T. I know most of you know obviously who AT&T is, but in the DoD marketplace, we've been working with the DoD for over 100 years since World War I. We're a networking company. We connect people and things. What's exciting about it in this context is, if you think about the DoD, it's a mobile force. We're a mobile company. So we have to lead with mobility. And 5G is just, it's really a step in a roadmap. As we look forward, there's going to be additional capabilities coming out with releases, particularly through the 3GPP partnership that we have. And I think a lot of these opportunities are, we look forward to see 6G and other Gs. That's not important. The technology roadmap and how we execute on that technology roadmap is important. The ecosystem that we develop with our partners, very important. No one company can do this alone. Nobody can. We have Qualcomm at the end of the table. How do we deliver these capabilities, specifically to the Navy in this context? It's really a big order to fill, but we have to do this together, and I think that's very important. One last thing I want to mention about AT&T is the amount of investment it's made. So in a Navy context, if you think about carrier battle groups and how expensive that is, that's what we're talking about here in the context of cost to roll out investment. And we've done that on the commercial side. And I think we can bring a lot to the game with our commercial portfolio. and just adapt it to the DoD needs. There's no need for the DoD to build their own 5G solutions when they can just tap into the commercial solutions already available. That's all I'll have. I'll turn it over to Dave.
Thanks, Mike. Greetings, aloha from the middle of the Pacific, where I live and work. Mike and T-Rex, thanks for the invite. It's an honor to be sitting at this table with these folks, these colleagues. So I think maybe one of my jobs is to bring an operational perspective. I'm Dave McDonald. I'm a Department of the Navy civilian. I'm the CIO and Plans and Programs Director out at NICTAM's PAC out in the middle of the Pacific. Been there for more than 15 years, so I woke up one morning and I was the old guy on campus out there. But so we live in today's reality out there with today's systems, today's technology, 15-year-old, 20-year-old technology, legacy infrastructure that goes back 30, 40 years. So very excited about this convergent renaissance in a set of parallel technologies, not confined to 5G, and I'll set some themes on that in a minute, where it makes me want to start my career all over again, reverse the clock and be a young ensign or a young technician again. I thought I'd use my time to set a few themes and a short little history of time for Department of the Navy. It was around 2013 when Fleet Cyber Command 10th Fleet, under the leadership of Admiral Mike Rogers and my friend Bill Layer, who was up at OPNAV at the time, put out the Navy's Information Dominance Roadmap. You can still find that online. It sort of framed a period from 2013 to 2028, and it had guideposts that really zeroed in on assured C2. There were some other things in there about maneuver, about resilience, but it really camped out and dropped anchor on assured C2. So for the better part of a decade, the Department of the Navy and their parallel concepts in the other services have been just fixated on this assured C2 idea. A lot of it is driven by peer and near-peer competition, adversaries with counter space, counter C2, counter ISRT, kinetic, non-kinetic doctrine, weapons, will, intent, and campaign strategy. So assured C2 is as much a thing today as it was 10 years ago when we really started talking about it in earnest. Along about 2015, 2016, Admiral Mike Gilday, when he was the Fleet Cyber Command 10th Fleet Commander, made about 3 trips out to Hawaii. We had some pretty significant quality time with him. And at that time, PAC Fleet was running assured C2 working groups, and I'd go to all of them, and I always got the feeling that we were sort of prematurely waving the surrender flag on contested C2, DDIL, mission command, right? It's like, oh, all is lost. A peer adversary is just going to level the battle space right at the beginning, and everything will be DDIL, and most things will go to thin line and mission command. And I remember having candid conversations with Admiral Mike Gilday around 2016, 2017. I said, we need to sort of get out of our depression here, stop waving the surrender flag, and start thinking about abundance. Because at the time, already there was this emergence of commercial renaissance in commercial space, in 5G, in software-defined networking, in edge compute, distributed compute, all these parallel technologies that coalesce to offer us opportunities to optimize abundance. So the real big theme, I think, that we think about is how do we optimize, leverage abundance, and pull this together in a disciplined way at scale, sustainable, affordable, with life cycle, with sufficient discipline, but as Aaron Weiss, the DOM CIO, likes to say, don't DOD the crap out of it, right? Take every advantage of commercial economies of scale, commercial integration and standards development, but also make sure that you're thinking about it as a weapons system. So there's some tough things to unpack there, but that's how we think about it operationally out in the middle of the Pacific, where we look west at a rising peer adversary, maybe a couple of peer adversaries or near peer adversaries that have every intent to come after us with everything. We use the term contested. contested logistics, contested maneuver, contested fires, contested everything. All of it, sort of in a form or fashion, becomes contested because of contested C2. So if we win the assured C2 battle, and we have resilience and agility and maneuver and security, and we have reconstitution capacity, and we have abundance with every option set that creates C2, then all those other contested things become a lot easier to manage in a fast fight. So those are some themes that I wanted to set early in the conversation, and I'll leave it there, and maybe some of the questions today will focus on a few of those ideas.
Thanks, Dave. Over to Ken.
So Dave, I really appreciate the perspective you just provided, especially with Assured C2. And one of the themes I'm going to bring you is Assured C2, Assured Comms, Assured PNT. Why aren't we striving for assured everything?
Yes.
Right, so my name's Ken Davis. I'm from Qualcomm Technologies. If you're not familiar, Qualcomm is a commercial, US-based world leader in 5G and connected intelligent semiconductor solutions, currently at the 3-nanometer level. So we're pushing the envelope commercially. So one of the misnomers about 5G, and we heard a little bit of this earlier, is that it's just the evolution of comms into your smartphone. It's so much more, right? So we get hung up on the 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G. It is a roadmap with some milestones, but the 5G roadmap is opening the aperture to be a myriad of technologies, from comms to positioning to sensing to AI, ML, bringing you autonomy, all feeding a broad aperture of industries on a myriad of platforms. Now, for a commercial company like Qualcomm, that is, and for AT&T for that matter, and Northrop, that makes for a really daunting challenge. How do you meet those needs for everybody? So what we've focused on is one technology framework, all leading to a connected, intelligent edge. That concept mirrors fairly nicely with a connected, intelligent battlefield, like we're hearing in some of our upcoming programs, and you guys alluded to a few of those. So that battlefield needs each of the traditional defense silos addressed. So I represent QGov, or Qualcomm Technologies, or Qualcomm Government Technologies, excuse me, QGov. So our job is to bridge the commercial curve with this connected, intelligent battlefield. So a few examples of how we do this are, so let's start with comms. So commercially, there's already cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth available today, but the technology is perfectly capable of satellite communications and MANET communications. In fact, satellite communications is turning into a commercial feature with NTN in the 5G standard, but also, as you might have seen, a recent partnership with Qualcomm and Iridium to bring those emergency services to your smartphone. So also interweaved in this whole story is a deep connection with artificial intelligence and machine learning that is built into this one technology framework. So that AI and ML, each one of our subsystems has access to an AI processor. So when you're talking about your assured C2, start applying AI and ML to get assured sensing, all the way up to autonomy, up to autonomous driving, or just situational awareness, where you can be aware of, are you under attack? Is there an adversary in your vicinity? Another version of awareness is awareness and sensing of your location. So commercially, the roadmap already supports all of the GNSS constellations, L1, L2, L5, along with signals of opportunity that come with 5G location, which is approaching centimeter level accuracy. And then if all of that is not available in your contested environment, then go to sensor fusion, where you can combine an IMU and a camera to bring a GPS denied location. A good example of this is our recent partnership with JPL, where we enabled Ingenuity, which is that little copter that just survived a Martian winter, to be enabled with a positioning system in kind of the ultimate GPS denied area on another planet. So a lot of opportunity here, a good mapping between a connected intelligent edge and a connected intelligent battlefield. But this is not a panacea. 5G is not a panacea for JADC2, and that's another misnomer. What's really going to be needed is a ecosystem of change makers to be formed, and I think you're seeing a little bit of this with this panel today. So if we can establish the USG partnered with a traditional defense contractor in Northrop, partnered with a US-based global supplier of network infrastructure in AT&T, combined with a US-based global leader in 5G connected intelligent semiconductors, I think we'll have an opportunity to challenge the traditional DoD lanes that are currently being served by bespoke technologies, and maybe we'll have a chance to realize that connected intelligent battlefield. So I look forward to how the rest of this panel discussion goes. I think you guys did a great job leading into that, and T-Rex.
Thank you, Ken, and panel members for your opening comments. For the rest of the panel, we'd really like to talk about what you'd like to hear about. So there's a microphone up front if you'd like to ask questions. As we transition into the question and answer portion, I want to take a couple of the themes that I heard across the table and look to see if we can tie them together as we get to the questions. Again, as people walk up to the microphone to ask questions, so we don't, so we get to your focus. But realistically, with the overall theme of readiness, capability, and capacity for this conference, looking at JADC2 and looking at the capabilities we have and leveraging the 5G technology in the background to link what already exists and integrate the new technology as it comes along. Especially when we start looking at the millimeter wave and the smaller transmitter pieces and fieldable capability forward. I think it's going to be a major difference here on what we can do. So when you start looking at Army units moving forward or Navy units on the sea, if you can now bring something small to increase your bandwidth in the field and then tie that in and link it into the larger DoD architecture, I think that that could be a huge and critical piece on where we go. So how do we leverage today's technology? And then also with the commercial industry being the leader in where technology is going, how do we leverage that commercial technology into DoD mission threats? So Ken and Dave really hit on it a lot on how do we leverage that capacity capability that's out there and weave that in and provide capability to the warfighter at the edge is important.
Yeah, hey T-Rex, if I may, to prime the pump a little bit on that and perhaps stimulate a question or two, just a show of hands, I would guess most of you folks follow the press on this last 3+ years, 4 years, right? The OSD-R&E, the DoD investment in advancing 5G through very specific R&D portfolios, right? Roughly $600 million, and there's probably more where that came from in the coming years. They're starting to have the discussion about how to bring this together with the renaissance in commercial space, the renaissance in edge compute, distributed compute, on-orbit compute. But so this is well more than just theoretical or PowerPoint conceptual. This is a very precise, prioritized investment. How many in the room have been kind of following the Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 OSD funded? Yeah, most of you. So the rest of my little short history of time is out in Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, right? So there's about 13 of those portfolios, Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 projects. You can follow their progress mostly in the open press. There's a lot of things happening behind closed doors that are really compelling. But this is a real investment in R&D, small scale, low or no risk pilots to do the learning, do the push-ups, advance the cause in terms of stimulating industry to bring really specific solutions to the table. But let me say this about that, and I'm not being trivial about R&D and pilots. You know, anybody with a checkbook and some R&D money can go do a JCTD or a Tranche 1 5G project or build a pilot and operate for 2 or 3 years and run some compelling use cases. And then, you know, the proverbial valley of death sort of creeps in. It's like, now what do we do, right? We just nailed it out of the park. We proved all these things. We wrote a 60-page report. You know, we got our names in the press. We had a ribbon cutting and so forth. Now what? Scale on this front is distinctly its own wicked innovation problem, right? There's an idea of the Heisenberg principle, right? You know, by observing an experiment, you change it. Well, by designing to R&D pilot for 2 or 3 years, you frame and shape your design in a rather strange way. If you design for scale and for efficiency and integration and standardization at scale and life cycle, you're going to design a distinctly different way, right? So that's going to be the next major strategic challenge that the DoD faces with the transition from experimentation to full operational scale in the most compelling lines of operation, lines of effort that the DoD cares about for war fighting. So hopefully that's a helpful
Thanks,
comment
Dave.
there.
Ken, I think you have a follow-on.
So
and then I've
Dave,
got
yeah,
one for Mike
once
after.
again, I really appreciate your perspectives. And one of the big messages when working with commercial, when working with AT&T, when working with the Qualcomms and our other peers, in order to do 5G at scale, the scale of commercial 5G is absolutely mind-blowing. You're talking about billions of devices needing to be connected and intelligent. So the amount, I really appreciate the pushes that the DoD has had in investment in R&D. It's going to pale compared to the investment that's coming from commercial just in order to meet our commercial scale. So one of our messages is it's not a panacea like I was talking about in my lead-in. However, commercial technologies should be considered, if for nothing else, just for scale and just for options to rethink some of the bespoke technologies that we are currently working with that will not scale to that level. So that, I think that is a great challenge for us and a great promise of, you know, where this topic can go.
So and then, Michael, I'll take that conversation with the OSD tranches as well as how do we best leverage commercial. I believe AT&T has been a portion of one of those efforts over at North Island looking at logistics and leveraging 5G for logistics. So leveraging commercial to that specific military mission set, if you have some comments on how that applied, it would be useful.
Yeah, I'd like to. Actually, this smart warehouse in Coronado Island is a great example of something that's ready to scale, I think. It also supports zero trust architecture. So that's a big thing as well that's ready, that the commercial side can bring. So let's talk about the smart warehouse. I know it's been a topic of discussion. On Monday, I think NIWIC was received an award for this. Lots of discussion. Some of you in the audience may have actually had the opportunity to tour the facility. It's really transformational. So we're able to tag all the equipment. If you're not familiar with what goes on in one of those warehouses for ship components, let's say, they're all cataloged like a library system, right? Like a Dewey Decimal System, and you pull out some parts, and you have to, you know, catalog and remember where it's very antiquated. So we're looking at tagging these parts and creating a whole supply chain system out of it. This is just one of the many things that we can do with these technologies. And there's also some very interesting things we can do with backhaul and roaming as well. So when we look at that, we put the whole thing together. What's the impact going to be on the Navy in the Pacific, right? In the 7th Fleet operating right now in the South China Sea, for example. This is going to be the impetus that drives a lot of change, good change, to support the mission. So that's just one example. At Tyndall Air Force Base, a hurricane wiped out the base a few years back. I think it was 2018. We rebuilt it. We built the network of the future today. We didn't wait and like go get all the requirements. And we're providing the current technology today, including a robot dog at the very end of that doing patrols. That's in production. It's actually doing that right now through swamps, where it was dirty, dangerous, or just something you wouldn't want your security forces to do. We have a drone doing that, a UXV doing that on behalf of what would normally be done by a human. So that's just one example. And I think we're going to find so many other use cases. Where we have some early examples with JADC2, for example, with 5G open architecture. What's that going to be like when we open up the architecture to all the vendors? So we avoid the vendor lock with just a few that have controlled the space. So I'll pause there. Dr. Soni, you might have some comments on that as well.
Give me a second. So Dave talked about scale and transition, so I do want to speak to transition from the DoD contractor side of the house. We are already impacting multiple very large programs inside Northrop using these technologies. Sometimes it's the technology as is, sometimes it's technology modified, sometimes it's technology with security, sometimes it's technology with signal processing. But at the end of the day, the scaling is being forced because we are working with the larger Northrop programs to start impacting them. So just wanted to throw that.
All right, sir, we have a first question. Go ahead.
Good morning, Alan Bowman.
I think you made it go right in.
Better?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Alan Bowman from the NC3 Enterprise Center, actually attached out at Fort Meade. One of the questions, and it's really, I guess, kind of directed toward you, Captain, is as the 5G opportunities are becoming more available and more prevalent in how we're operating, and as we're getting results back from the different test beds and so forth, are you hearing any specific guidance from maybe DoD CIO or somebody at that level as to resiliency, the reliability, and so forth? Because the key thing as far as an integrated warehouse as an example, and as we're putting more and more base infrastructure onto the 5G type things to get rid of the copper plants and all that kind of good stuff. I know that Dave's probably neck deep in trying to get rid of copper everywhere on Oahu. But what requirements are being developed as far as saying, hey, this is the minimum requirements as far as endurance and durability and so forth? Because from an enterprise level, my concern is if Joint Base Hickam, Pearl Hickam gets hit, okay, yeah, I'm concerned that they're taken out of the fight, but also, how soon can I expect them back in the fight? Quite frankly, and I just haven't seen any of those requirements being put out there that, hey, this is your tier 1 resources that have to be available, high availability, all that kind of stuff. But what are you seeing so far?
Yes, sir. So Dave's chomping at the bit, but I'm going to start with it anyway.
Yeah,
but I'm going to start with it anyway.
So I won't in any way presume.
Go ahead, Dave.
I won't speak for some of the other, there's 13 of these Tranche 1, Tranche 2 experimental platforms in various stages of design, development, fielding, and testing. So the Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam portfolio is the largest one in the DoD, mainly focused on flight line of the future, MRO, right, maintenance, refit, overhaul, a few other things. We've got some really compelling bolt-on use case ideas that will get at some of your questions. Two things on this. One is, so everybody's favorite buzz phrase, zero trust architecture, zero trust operations. So there are defined criteria under NIST and CISA and NSA and Cyber Command on what sort of design criteria you really need to think through in any architecture that is viewed as mission critical. And I can assure you, because I know this about all the 5G portfolios across the DoD, every single one of those projects is having really constructive, very exquisite discussions with their industry partners about how to design that in. So now, does that solve the entire resilience, reconstitution, diversity, and wartime kind of maneuver question? It does not. So some of those pilots are having, at levels we can't fully talk about here, are having discussions about, okay, now I'm designing this thing as a war-fighting system, warfare critical infrastructure for command and control, Internet of Things, synchronized maneuvers, synchronized fires, synchronized ISRT, you name it, synchronized logistics. So I would postulate that within 12 to 18 months, as we start having outcomes from those pilot experiments, You're going to have some demonstrable capability that says, okay, this is what resilience looks like in a, let's say, a hybrid terrestrial, non-terrestrial, integrated 5G, future G, C2 infrastructure. I've got enterprise management and control built into the thing based on some data standards between those layers. And if you conceive of, one of my opening themes was abundance, right? Now, how many of those kind of platforms do I need? What is my capacity to work with industry to reconstitute those platforms? It's things like reusable launch and all kinds of elements of that reconstitution and resilience equation. So I think we're going to do a heap of learning through these 5G pilots about exactly your question.
Well, and really looking at your specific use case in this instance in Hawaii, I'm looking at what is being designed, dreamt up as far as self-healing mesh networks that adds to that resiliency, taking advantage of other bandwidths. Because I'm looking at they say a day without space. Well, let's talk a month or two without space and a cable cut. Now what do you do?
Sir.
So anyway,
A couple other pieces to your original question, kind of piggybacking on what Dave was saying. My understanding of where the 5G infrastructure is and how the technology actually works, access and accessing the network is still a critical piece of that. So some of the security pieces are built in. I think when people go to the high end, what if something becomes a black hole theories, I firmly believe that the US has proven over our history that when there's a black hole challenge and where there's a holy smokes, a major piece has happened, that is where we have our industry partners step up and truly help us support. And I think the advantages of this 5G capability, as Mike mentioned a little bit in the disaster at Tyndall, is that we have the ability to now reconstitute more rapidly, not needing to put in significant wired infrastructure. Being able to end up having wireless transmitters and mesh networks like that, I believe we'll have the ability to reconstitute more quickly within that and leveraging the technology available and just realistically leveraging the American willpower.
I'm going to see if I can tee up Ken here a little bit with this comment.
You've done a great job so far, Dave.
Think about abundance through all the layers of these kind of architectures, from terrestrial to space. Think about abundance and manageability of millions of endpoints, right? Endpoint services, endpoint devices, right, that can plug and play into that infrastructure. And then think about how that complicates an adversary's targeting problem, right?
Good tee up, because now take those billions and push connectivity and intelligence to all of those nodes. So this is the thing that I think we need to consider in terms of flexibility and resilience, not having a single point of failure due to your technology. So not everything has to be home run back to the cloud. So I deal a lot with U.S. Special Forces, and one of the comments that comes back from them is, I cannot depend upon communications and information round-tripping from the cloud. I have to be self-sufficient. So all the way down to your soldiers, your vehicles, all the way to your sensors need to be self-sufficient, and we can start pushing some of the intelligence that comes through from the traditional technologies and from the traditional approaches can now be applied through artificial intelligence and machine learning all the way to individual nodes on individual sensors. And that's where I think the real disruption is going to come from. So I really love that question and the whole topic.
David,
So
Ken, thank
you touched a nerve, so I am going to step in, sorry, T-Rex, which is none of that happens unless you have a really, really intelligent networking layer.
That's right.
Right? Guess where you're getting that from? So I'll just leave it at that.
All right, so I've obviously lost control of the panel, but that's okay. Sir, we have another question.
Yes, Ari Lewis, I'm technical
And can you
director.
please step up to the mic, just make sure everyone can hear. Thanks.
Ari Lewis, I'm with Oracle, technical director there. In my other capacity, I'm a Intel captain, right? So I'm looking at this, and this is fantastic, right, for the warfighter. My question is, if I was to put on my Intel hat, right, I would counter this by saying, hey, 5G is available as a commodity device across the spectrum, right? Our adversary has the same kind of capabilities. What are we doing to provide that, without going to the SAP type of discussion, what are we doing to provide a technical moat that we normally would have for a military system, right, versus a commodity-based systems.
Yeah.
So not only are we going to stay away from SAP, we're going to keep it on class altogether.
That's exactly
But
right.
I think realistically, as we're looking at integrating those civilian commercial technologies into military equipment, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Soni, because I think really looking at balancing that commercial capability into our government delivery is really right in the Northrop wheelhouse.
So that's my job. I don't trust Ken. Sorry.
And I want to partner with Tarun. So.
So the commercial world is developing at scale, at abundance, right? But to your point, we can't take it as is for a whole bunch of reasons, one of which is the threat there, right? So it becomes our job to transition that to the warfighter scenarios in the presence of adversary action, all that stuff, okay? That includes security on the edges, that includes resilience inside the system. So the phrase zero trust, already too overused, right? That really does include that construct. So we are working, in fact, almost all our internal efforts have touched that frame, if you will. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yes, I just want to make sure. I mean, this is fantastic capability, but commercial capabilities has a dual edge, right? Because
Let me break that into the stack, right? So at the phi layer, if you will, you are still staying with your exquisite systems, because I got to survive bad day scenarios, et cetera, right? At the network layer and above is when I start throwing in all my cybersecurity. So as you walk up and down the stack, and I need help from Ken on the AI front, for example, right? But as you walk up and down the stack, it's not a single point. It's defense across the stack, or defense in depth, if you want the buzzword, if you will.
Yeah,
right?
Dr. Soni, if I may add one, so there's actually some very interesting things to unpack in your important question. You use the term commodity. So this is we're not talking about a commodity. I opened with my remarks about Aaron Weiss, Don CIO's comment behind closed doors, and I know he's been quoted on this, don't DOD the crap out of it. So that has some real meaning. That means we don't over-engineer every component of this with every industry partner every step of the way. That's a death march. You'll never get there, and you'll end up with an unaffordable kludge of nonsense. But by the same token, the dialogue we're having with industry, whether it's terrestrial 5G, future G, whether it's enterprise management and control plane, network function virtualization, whether it's non-terrestrial, space, commercial, SATCOM, how those things kind of dovetail together. We are having the discussions about warfighting C2 system, not commodity, not utility, warfighting C2 system. Somewhere there's a sweet spot to be found there where we don't DOD the crap out of it and take 15 years to do it. We take advantage of speed, industry resilience, and agility, but we also recognize every step of the way what we're fielding here, is a warfighting system. And this also gets into your question: was how do you make sure that the adversary can't just take it, right? From an intelligence perspective, a targeting, non-kinetic or kinetic targeting. I would come back to the abundance point. You really confound an adversary's ISR and targeting problem when you have that degree of abundance. You have options, and reconstitution becomes trivial.
Mike, I've got a question for you following on that I think will align to this. In some of our prep, we talked a lot about Qualcomm's capabilities at the edge and Northrop's integration into our legacy systems, but the infrastructure backend that our large telcos provide and connecting those structures. Could you tie that some to that question on how we end up defending against what an adversary may try and do against us when we're looking at that infrastructure backbone and the connectivity of these other capabilities?
Yeah, on the commercial side, AT&T sees about 500 petabytes of data. Let's say a third of the internet traffic per day running through our fiber. And by the way, we're talking about 5G. Most of the 5G traveling is through fiber, right? 5G is just this cell towers, and then fiber takes care of the rest at the speed of light, right? Through terrestrial or undersea cables. So that's a very important distinction that we also bring to the game. Now, in terms of our cybersecurity, we get millions of threats a day. I don't know what the exact number is, but we'll just say billions over the course of a year. And we have to use artificial intelligence to monitor these things, see when, especially the zero-day threats as they pop up, and figure out how to mitigate those. So it's a big task, but we're doing it on the commercial side already, and I think we need to take advantage of our network operations center, our security operations centers that do this. We have a network operations center in Hawaii, not working at the level that we're working at in say the commercial side, but it is a network operations center looking at monitoring the performance of our optical rings around the various bases, 5 bases in Hawaii and other areas. So we have a good feel for what's going on. We know how to mitigate those. We often see what's going on before some of the other DoD partners do that are doing the same types of things. So hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Mike. And it looks like we have another question coming.
Hi, I'm Andy Lighty from Niwak Pacific. Hey, Dave. You're probably aware the current National Defense Authorization has some language in there encouraging the use of an open radio access network approach when we roll out 5G on our military bases. I would love to hear your comments, especially AT&T and Qualcomm, on the maturity of open radio access networks. Is the industry moving in that direction organically? Do they need to be pushed in the U.S.? And really, is there a chance that the industry may not adopt Open RAN, 10, 15 years from now?
Yeah, it's a Betamax
over to you.
VHS discussion for those that got that, been around long enough. I wouldn't remember it, but that's what I hear. So, yeah, interesting point there with Open RAN. And we do have a public release that came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago. We have a collaboration with Northrop, and we're testing the 5G Open RAN in a tactical environment. I'll let Dr. Soni comment more on that. But I also want to mention that there's many DoD initiatives that are going after 5G Open RAN, right? So I'm thinking of Innovate Beyond 5G, there's a 6G one. I think the CHIPS Act also encourages Open RAN. How this is going to turn out, we don't know. But as I mentioned earlier, that with an open architecture, you can invite a lot more vendors in, prevent vendor lock. Is that the panacea? Is this going to fix everything? Don't know yet. It's very nascent, but we're doing some early experimentation. And Dr. Soni, if you want to comment on that, please.
Okay, I'm going to short circuit Ken for a second. So we don't get a choice, bluntly. Okay, so commercial can choose to stay in closed RAN, other worlds, if they want to. We have a unique problem in that I am trying to stitch together, we collectively are trying to stitch together a bunch of really disparate waveforms from space through underwater. So when you are trying to do that, your architecture inevitably lands at Open RAN. You may call it something else, but it lands at Open RAN. So I think for the DoD, that's a critical effort. It's useful if it's a standard, because then the next exquisite waveform that gets built for some fancy thing, okay, can also plug into the same standard, and you don't have to redo the proxies and the hooks and the interfaces. But even if it's not a standard, we are stuck with actually having that architecture. So I'm kind of hoping industry actually keeps that Open RAN stream alive and keeps it going, so that I don't have to do the heavy lifting bluntly. But we don't get a choice. Architecturally, we are stuck. We have to do it that way. Sorry, Ken.
Yeah, I would concur. I mean, we're trying to get to a connected, intelligent everything. So, and that means more flexible infrastructure. Open RAN plays a big role in that. So I think your bet's pretty good.
And
Yeah,
by the way,
it's maybe one government perspective. I hardly speak for the Don or for the bigger DoD on this, but I have a perspective, having grown my way into this over 4 or 5 years now. If it ain't ORAN, it's going to be something a lot like it, right? And the reason is, on purely the commercial side, at massive global scales, there are compelling motivations, for all of the industry players, whether they're on the ground or in space or in between or in the management plane, compelling motivators to have something a lot like ORAN and ORAN up into NTN, right, non-terrestrial. That's where the massive revenue streams are going to come from, right? Internet of Things, everything over IP, everything sort of as a service for most of the commercial world, largely commoditized and monetized. How the DoD sort of jumps on top of that, and over years you can envision we're going to become a relatively smaller and smaller part of the revenue stream for these capabilities worldwide. I think that's true. We'll see how it shapes up. But if the ORAN alliance is not what glues that all together, It'll have to be something a lot like it, derivative of 3GPP and other standards bodies that have to figure out, you know, data standards, API standards in the network function virtualization of these capabilities. You know, is that sort of a hand wave? It's going to have to happen in some form or fashion. O-RAN is a good bet, I think, today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks. And then touching a little bit on that, and then back to Alan's earlier question on, hey, do you see DoD CIO guidance? Do you see specific guidance on this? There are conversations and discussions, but at the same time, I frame a lot of this new technology that the guidance we have is guidance that is there to begin with. I got it, RMF is a 3-letter word, borderline 4-letter word, but we've got some of those guidance that's out there. I look at that as guidance shouldn't limit us. It should let us know where does the new technology not exactly fit, and ensure that we request access leveraging the technology. So what are the other protections within the technology that may not neatly fit into current guidance? And either get exceptions to policy from those pieces, or drive those exceptions to become the new policy. The DON-CIO conference on Monday, there were a lot of discussions on where that's been leveraged in some cloud opportunities and some zero trust projects, but I believe the same will apply to 5G, that much of the guidance is out there. If we wait for new guidance, we will be at XG before we actually get there. So realistically, how do we develop that guidance and how do we move forward on that? And I do think it ties a little bit into the Intel, a couple of the different themes. And especially with how much faster commercial is moving, if we wait for our guidance to catch up with commercial, we'll fail at this point.
My question as far as guidance was more toward how is the Department of Defense and the Navy, in this instance, how are they looking at mission services? What are their criticalities? So when we implement a 5G solution in support of this service over here, okay, because of the mission criticality of this operation center, then we have to have X amount of endurance, redundant paths. I'm not saying that I'm not asking are there technological requirements being promulgated or discussed, because if you do that, you're going to tie at least an arm and a half behind your back, and then by the time you get it fielded, we're on to 12G. But my point is, what are they looking at for a standardization? Because again, in my perspective, if on a bad day scenario, Joint Base Hickam, Pearl Hickam just got taken out of the fight, right. But based on the requirements that big DoD is leveraging on that base, we know that they should at least have these mission critical services up, and this should be coming back online. Because I mean, there's so many things when we're talking about water. Sensitive subject in Pearl, I know, but anyway. But you know, between water, hell, the CDC. You know, how is power? All these different systems that support infrastructure, that support comps, that support the warfighter. All those things. That's my bigger question: is are they having those discussions about what are the requirements that are going to be on how do we field this for an endurance and a reliability standpoint?
Roger, and I do think that we are having those conversations. When you start looking at the power and cooling pieces, I think that drives any tech and any system that we've got, whether it's 5G or not. I personally believe that the 5G technology helps us with that, because you end up having lower power requirements for similar bandwidth. Now, if you want the full spectrum, you may need to crank a lot more power, but realistically, you may be able to get some capability with less back-end infrastructure requirement. So I think it really helps us meet the current requirements more than creating new ones.
Yeah, T-Rex, let me be a bit more specific about that, you know, because we and if Andy is still in the room, you know, some of us have a ringside seat in the DON 5G IPT, which then dovetails us in with the DoD 5G cross-functional team, which involves all of the military departments at the highest levels, at the secretariat level and at the echelon 1 level. So we get to kind of hear, you know, strategizing and notionalizing about where this is all taking us. Think two big buckets of application of this kind of technology writ large. You know, the fixed wireless access base and station infrastructure encapsulates a lot of things: operational technology, ICS SCADA, base operating services, and then think tactical forward expeditionary warfighting C2, assured C2, right? Also keep in mind that when you think about Navy's overmatch or JADC2, massive number of shore nodes are critical JADC2 nodes, right? They're every bit as important as something out west of the date line, right? So we have to factor that into all strategic planning. So here's the beauty of this abundance theme, options, resilience, diversity. And I say this at some risk, right? General Patton said after World War II, fixed fortifications are a monument to the stupidity of man, right? They're all targets, right? I work at NICTAM's PAC. NICTAM's PAC has been in the high meadows of Waihua since the 1940s. We have other sites that have been in place for almost 100 years. If you don't think the Chinese or the Russians or whoever knows where every single one of those fixed fortifications is, here's the point. We're fast entering an era where virtualization, distribution, and the obfuscation of everything becomes completely feasible at reasonable cost.
Thanks, Dave. As we have a couple minutes remaining. Thank you all very much for your attention. As we close out, I'm going to go ahead and give each panel member 2 to 3 sentences on what you think the audience should walk away with based on our conversation. So as you're stepping off the stage and getting ready to go home, what do you want these folks thinking about from 5G from your perspective? And then we'll go backwards the way we came before. So Ken, 2 to 3 sentences, Ken and Dave.
So 1, listen to Dave. 2, know that the commercial technologies brought to you by 5G are available today. Know that there are partners like Qualcomm, like AT&T from the commercial space that love this mission set and are ready to partner with the traditional defense contractors, with the USG, to help our warfighter and to bring a connected, intelligent battlefield.
Thank you, Ken. Dave?
How many industry folks in this audience, please? Yeah, so I'll frame it this way. Stick with us on this. As they say in Boston, this is wickedly hard, I think. I'm not from Boston, obviously, but I am Irish. Wickedly hard, not a commodity, gonna require design, gonna require some level of open, integration, a lot of open integration, and patience, right? Because over time, the DoD, not your biggest customer at scales, not your biggest revenue source, but this is an American challenge. It's a U.S. and allies and partners challenge, and it's game-changing asymmetric advantage that we're after. It addresses anything that you can characterize as contested, denied, limited, isolated, or killed, right?
Thank
the
you, Dave.
foundation is assured C2.
Thanks, Dave. Michael?
Yeah, 2 things. So, Alan, to your question earlier, we have the technology today. It's the policies, procedure, acquisitions. We all know that. We've been to enough of these conferences to know. But still, there's still a problem. But we have the technology today to integrate the mini city that's called the base with power, energy, water, infrastructure, comms, critical nodes, as you mentioned. So we can do that today. And let's throw in TDM as well, all the copper. I mean, we're struggling with that. We can solve that too. So let's do the stuff that's easy. And then the harder stuff, as we get to the tactical edge. We've got, AT&T has some very exciting things we're contemplating at the tactical edge, along with some of our partners, right? No one company, I think, can deliver all of it. But if you're interested, I'd like to talk more about that later if you guys want to tap me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Tarun?
So I'll start with we can't trust Ken. No, but you do need an ecosystem, so I guess you're stuck with Ken.
We're here to help.
This is so easy. No, but somewhat more seriously, the 5G, XG stream of work, the commercial stream of work, brings scale, mobility, resilience, those sorts of things. Pay attention to that, right? I will go back to the phrase I used, organizing principle. It's more than technology. It's an organizing principle for how you do networking, how you do battle management almost. Finally, I think I'll finish with, from what I can gather, my kid has better networking than the warfighter. How dare you? I'll just leave it at that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And then finally, as we wrap up, one of the things I really look at is transport matters. And the magic of 5G is it's more than transport. It's software defined, and it's managing that and being able to get the best capability and bandwidth and the lowest latency out to the folks that need it. I think that is critical and important. At Indo-PACOM right now, we're working on the Joint Fires Network, making sure that we can share tactical data from the operational and tactical sides of war. And the capabilities that these gentlemen discussed and the capabilities that are being developed across industry are going to be critical in connecting the operational, tactical, and strategic levels of war going into the next fight. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate your attention, and enjoy the rest of the conference.